Maya arrived at Giovanni's Harbour Grill 20 minutes early, a habit formed from nervous energy rather than punctuality. She smoothed her deep emerald dress one last time, feeling the silk beneath her fingertips as she checked her reflection in her phone. Her dark curls fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and she had applied makeup with careful precision, trying to hide the anxiety that gnawed at her insides. James always said she looked most beautiful when she was nervous, the way her eyes seemed larger, more vulnerable. Tonight, she needed to look vulnerable because she was about to break his heart, or at least, that's how it would feel. The restaurant hummed with the warmth of intimate conversations, the clink of glasses, and the soft melody of a jazz trio in the corner. Candlelight flickered across white tablecloths, and couples leaned close to one another, lost in their own worlds. Maya loved this place. It was where James had first said, "I love you," exactly 3 years and 4 months ago. When James arrived, he radiated his usual calm confidence. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, his dark hair slightly tousled from the evening breeze. His warm smile melted her anxiety momentarily. He kissed her cheek, lingering just slightly longer than usual, and she wondered if he could sense something was different. "You look stunning," he whispered, pulling out her chair with a gentleness that made her throat tighten. Dinner arrived in courses: fresh oysters, herb-crusted salmon, risotto that seemed to melt on her tongue. But Maya could barely taste anything. She pushed her food around, her mind replaying the past 3 months over and over. It had started innocently enough. David had joined the contemporary art gallery where Maya worked as a senior designer. He was 42, confident, with silver threading through his dark hair and an intensity in his gaze that seemed to see straight through to her soul. He had spent decades in the art world, New York, London, Paris, and when he offered to mentor her, Maya had felt like she'd won the lottery. The mentoring began with coffee meetings and gallery walks. David challenged her perspective on color, form, and meaning. He pushed her to think deeper about her art, to question her own creative instincts. And somewhere between a discussion about Frida Kahlo's use of pain as a medium and a late evening spent rearranging a gallery installation, Maya had felt something shift inside her. It wasn't the passionate, overwhelming love she felt for James. It was quieter, more dangerous. It was the spark of being truly seen and understood by someone new. James set down his fork and reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "You've been quiet tonight," he observed, his voice carrying that gentle concern that had become his signature. "Really quiet. What's going on in that beautiful mind of yours?" Maya looked at his hand, at the simple silver band she had given him 2 years ago, at the small scar on his thumb from when he'd accidentally cut himself building a bookshelf for her apartment. She memorized his hand like she might never touch it again. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the restaurant. James's expression shifted to alertness. He leaned forward, his brown eyes searching hers. "Okay. You're scaring me a little." Maya took a long sip of water, stalling. The wine bar's signature burgundy wine sat in her glass, but alcohol felt dangerous right now. She needed her mind sharp, her words precise. "James, you know I love you." "Right," she started, and immediately regretted it. Nothing good ever followed "we need to talk" or "you know I love you," but... "Of course I do," he replied, but his hand remained suspended in the air between them, not quite touching anymore. "What's happening?" Maya closed her eyes for just a moment, gathering courage. "There's someone at the gallery. His name is David, and he's been mentoring me artistically. He's brilliant and knowledgeable, and somewhere along the way, I developed feelings for him. They're not like what I feel for you, but they exist, and I couldn't keep pretending they don't. You deserve the truth." The jazz music seemed to stop. Or maybe it continued, but Maya's world had narrowed to James's face, the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes widened with hurt, the way he slowly withdrew his hand as if he'd touched something too hot. "Are you," he started, then stopped. He glanced down at his plate, then back at her. "Do you want to leave me for him?" "No," Maya whispered, tears finally spilling over. "No, James, I want to be with you. I always want to be with you. That's why I had to tell you. I couldn't live with this secret anymore. It was poisoning everything between us." James sat back in his chair, processing. Around them, The restaurant continued its gentle hum of normalcy, utterly indifferent to the quiet earthquake happening at table number 7. "I need air," he said finally, standing up. "Let's take a walk." They stepped out into the cool harbor breeze, the city lights reflecting off the dark water. James's face was unreadable now, a mask of controlled emotion. Maya followed him down to the waterfront path, her emerald dress suddenly feeling too warm, too exposing. James stopped at a railing overlooking the water. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice steady but distant. "I need to understand what happened." And so Maya did. She told him about the mentoring sessions that ran late, about how David's words seemed to unlock something inside her that she didn't know was locked. She explained the confusion, the guilt, the way she felt like she was betraying James with every passing moment she didn't tell him the truth. She confessed that nothing physical had happened, but that intimacy came in many forms, and David's understanding of her creative soul felt like a kind of intimacy she hadn't experienced before. James listened without interruption, his silhouette rigid against the city lights. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I'm not angry," he finally said, and somehow that was worse than anger would have been. "I'm hurt. I'm confused. But I'm not angry." He turned to look at her, and Maya saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the same vulnerability she had brought to the dinner table, but now it was reflected back at her. "We need to figure out what happens next," James said softly. "Because I love you, Maya. And if you love me, then we need to fight for this." Maya stepped toward him, and James didn't pull away. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his familiar warmth, his familiar scent of cedar and coffee. He held her, and in that moment, suspended between the city lights and the dark water, Maya understood that honesty might be the hardest road they could take together. But perhaps it was also the only road that would lead them somewhere real. The night of reflection. The apartment felt different when they returned home. The same soft lighting from their ecru lamps, the same photographs of them laughing on the walls, but everything felt fragile, like glass that might shatter with the slightest pressure. James moved through the space like a ghost, finally settling on the edge of their bed while Maya hovered in the doorway, unsure if she was still allowed to enter fully. He loosened his navy blazer, running both hands through his hair in a gesture of exhaustion and frustration combined. "I'm going to need time," he said quietly, "to process this, to understand what it means." Maya nodded, though his words felt like a door closing between them. She changed into an oversized sweater and soft pants, removing the carefully applied makeup and emerald dress, trying to shed the persona of the woman who had confessed her conflicted heart at a candlelit table. They lay in bed together but not touching, the space between them feeling like an ocean. Maya could hear James breathing, feel the weight of his hurt even in silence. She wanted to reach across and touch his back, to run her fingers across the familiar contours she knew by heart, but something stopped her. Around 2 in the morning, James got up and moved to the couch in their living room. Maya heard him settle there, heard the soft sound of the television playing at low volume. She wanted to follow him, to force them to work through this together, but she understood that sometimes love meant respecting someone's need for distance. The next morning brought grey winterlight and the weight of unspoken words. James made coffee in the kitchen while Maya sat at their small dining table, pretending to read an art book she wasn't actually seeing. They moved around each other like careful dancers, afraid of collision. "I need to understand who he is," James finally said, sitting across from her with 2 steaming mugs. "David. I need to know what he offers you that I don't." Maya wrapped her hands around the warmth of her coffee. "He makes me feel artistically alive. He asks challenging questions about my work, my vision, my future as a creative person. With you, everything is comfortable and safe. We don't really talk about deep things anymore." James flinched at this, and Maya immediately regretted her words. "That's not fair," he said, his voice tighter than before. "We talk about plenty of things. We just don't intellectually debate art history anymore because we've built a life. We talk about real things, about our dreams, about marriage, about the future." "I know," Maya said softly. "I'm not explaining this right. It's not that you're not enough. It's that I'm not enough for myself. And he made me feel like I could be more." James stood up abruptly and moved to the window. Outside, the city bustled with people going about their ordinary lives, unaware of the emotional chaos happening in this small apartment. Did he know? James asked, his back still to her. About me? Maya hesitated just long enough that James knew the answer. Oh, he breathed out. So he knew and still pursued something with you. It wasn't like that. It was subtle. Encouraging glances. The way he would stand close during installations. Conversations that stretched into the evening. Maya stood and walked toward him. James, nothing physical happened. Doesn't feel like nothing, he said quietly. That afternoon, Maya received a text from David. How did the conversation go? She stared at those 5 words, realizing that David had been waiting to hear if she had told James, waiting to see what doors this honesty might open. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned off her phone and spent the evening sitting beside James on the couch, both of them watching a movie neither was really watching. By evening, James's hurt had transformed into something more complex. As they lay in bed again, closer this time but still not touching, he whispered into the darkness. I'm trying to understand this. I'm trying to see your perspective. But it feels like you chose someone else's validation over our relationship. You chose his attention over our safety. I didn't choose him over you, Maya replied. I just didn't choose anything. I let things happen. I let my feelings grow without examining them or stopping them. Which is its own kind of choice, James said. Maya couldn't argue with that. Somewhere between silence and understanding, they both drifted into an uneasy sleep, their bodies finally touching, but their hearts still circling each other cautiously, trying to find solid ground again. The accidental encounter. 3 weeks later, Maya found herself alone at the Metropolitan Contemporary Art Gallery, the very place where her carefully constructed world had begun to crack. She was there to install a new exhibition, Emerging Artists and Experimental Forms. David had scheduled himself to be at a conference in Boston, a fortunate circumstance that had given Maya breathing room. James had slowly emerged from his initial hurt and shock into something more productive, conversations. They had talked through many evenings, sitting in their apartment or walking through the city, examining what had happened and what it meant for their relationship. James had asked difficult questions, and Maya had answered them honestly. She had also asked him questions about his feelings, his fears, his own needs that might not be getting met. The talking had been painful but healing, like cleaning a wound. They were rebuilding something, though neither was sure what shape it would take. Maya was hanging a particularly striking painting, abstract forms in deep blues and vibrant golds, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. That's magnificent. She turned to find James standing in the gallery, dressed in casual weekend clothes, dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater. Her heart fluttered with both joy and surprise. I didn't know you were coming, she said, climbing down from the ladder. I wanted to see your world, he replied, and Maya understood what he meant. He wanted to understand the place where her artistic passion lived, the environment that had created the space for feelings to grow. I wanted to see where the magic happened. They walked through the gallery together, and Maya explained her curatorial choices, her vision for the exhibition, the stories of each artist. James listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand her passion. It was something they had lost somewhere in the comfort of routine. As they turned a corner into the east wing, Maya's breath caught in her throat. David stood there, studying a sculpture, his back to them. His shoulders were broad beneath his expensive charcoal coat, his silver-threaded hair catching the gallery lights. He turned, and his face broke into a warm smile upon seeing Maya, then the smile faltered slightly as his gaze moved to James. Maya, David said smoothly, walking toward them. I thought you said you were managing the installation alone this weekend. Plans changed, James said before Maya could respond. He extended his hand. James. Maya's partner. The word partner hung between them, more powerful than any claiming could be. David shook his hand, and Maya watched the subtle shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps even respect, for this man standing beside her with quiet confidence. David, he replied. I've been mentoring Maya on her curatorial vision. Yes, James said, his voice steady and calm. She's mentioned that. You've been very influential in her work. The three of them stood in a triangle, the sculpture looming between them, a twisted form of metal that seemed to capture their exact moment, 3 points of tension and form, seeking balance. "Actually," David said, turning to Maya, "I owe you an apology. I let my own interests cloud my professional judgment. James deserves better than that, and so do you. You were finding your voice, and I should have been a purely professional mentor." Maya felt James's arm slip around her waist, a gesture of solidarity and trust. "What matters is where we go from here," James said, and Maya heard in his voice a maturity that made her love him even more fiercely than before. They left the gallery together shortly after, the tension dissolving into something almost peaceful. Outside, the city sprawled around them, full of possibility and ordinary life. James took Maya's hand, a simple gesture they had done 1,000 times before, but this time it felt like a renewal. "Thank you for bringing me here," he said. "For helping me understand this part of your world. And for being honest about everything." "Thank you for staying," Maya replied. "For not running away when things got complicated." They found themselves at a small cafe they loved, ordering hot chocolate on the chilly afternoon. Through the window, they watched people passing by, each with their own stories, their own complications and confessions. "I realized something," James said, stirring his chocolate slowly. "Love isn't about never being tempted or never feeling conflicted. It's about choosing every single day to come home to the person who knows you best, to build something with them even when things get messy." Maya reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry it took almost losing you to understand that." "I'm not," James said, surprising her. "Because now we know what we're fighting for. We know our foundation is strong enough to survive honesty, vulnerability, and fear the rediscovery." Winter melted into spring, and with it came a tentative rebirth of their relationship. Maya had carefully distanced herself from David at work, maintaining only professional courtesy. David, respecting the boundaries that had been established, had begun to focus his mentoring energy on other young artists at the gallery. James and Maya started small with rediscovery. They revisited their favorite spots, the botanical garden where they had first met at a friend's garden party, the old bookstore with creaky wooden floors where they spent entire afternoons lost in separate worlds but together in companionship. They took long walks through the city, holding hands like they were young again, finding new conversations that didn't revolve around the crisis that had brought them to this point. One Saturday afternoon in early April, they found themselves at the botanical garden again. Cherry blossoms were exploding in clouds of pale pink and white, petals drifting down like snow. The garden was crowded with families and couples, but Maya felt like they inhabited their own private world beneath the blooming trees. "Do you remember when we first came here?" James asked, pulling her closer as they walked a familiar path. "You got lost," Maya said, laughing at the memory. "We were supposed to meet your friend David, the one you went to architecture school with, and you had no idea where the garden entrance was." "I was too distracted by you," James replied, stopping beneath a particularly full cherry tree. "I had just met you the night before at Sarah's party, and I was determined to figure out an excuse to see you again. When David suggested the garden, I jumped at it." Maya smiled, remembering her own nervousness that day. She had worn a blue sundress, and James had accidentally spilled water on it during their conversation. It had been the most charming disaster. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying a weight and truth that had been tested and proven. James drew her close, his hand finding the small of her back. "I love you too. Even when things are complicated. Especially when things are complicated." They stood together beneath the cherry blossoms, and James leaned down to kiss her. It was tender and slow, a rediscovery of intimacy that had been carefully rebuilding. When they parted, Maya felt tears on her cheeks, not of sadness, but of relief and joy. That evening, they returned to their apartment and cooked dinner together, something they hadn't done in months. James chopped vegetables while Maya prepared pasta from scratch, and they moved around each other with newfound grace. They opened a bottle of wine and sat at their dining table, talking about everything and nothing. "I've been thinking about something," Maya said as they finished dinner. "I want to apply for that curatorial fellowship. The one in London. It's a year-long program." James set down his fork. "Oh. But only if we do it together," Maya continued. "I want you to come with me. I want to build our life together, Not around my ambitions or your career, but as partners making decisions together. James reached across the table and took both of her hands. I would follow you anywhere. But not because you asked me to. Because I want to build a life with you, and I want it to be a life we choose together. They made love that night with a tenderness and intentionality that felt new. James kissed her slowly, starting at her forehead and making his way down, across her cheekbones, over her lips, along her neck and collarbone. Maya ran her fingers across his shoulders and back, relearning the geography of his body with fresh appreciation. They moved together without urgency, taking their time, whispering affirmations and apologies and promises. When they came together, it felt like a reconciliation, a recommitment, a renewal of everything they had built together. Afterward, lying in the dark with James's arm around her and her head on his chest, Maya felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. I'm scared sometimes, she admitted. That I'll take you for granted again. That we'll fall back into old patterns. Then we won't, James said simply. We'll keep talking. We'll keep choosing each other. We'll remember that love is something you have to actively nurture and protect. The choice and forever. 6 months later, Maya and James stood on the rooftop garden of their new London apartment, overlooking the city as it glittered beneath the stars. It was their first night in the space, boxes still stacked in the living room, but the rooftop had seemed more important to explore first. Maya wore a simple white linen dress, and James had discarded his jacket, standing beside her in his dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The night air was cool and carried the promise of spring turning into summer. I have something for you, James said, turning to face her. Maya's breath caught as she watched him reach into his pocket. She had suspected this might happen, but nothing could have prepared her for the actual moment. James pulled out a velvet box and dropped to one knee. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes as he looked up at her with a vulnerability and certainty that took her breath away. Maya, you taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's not about never being tempted or never feeling conflicted. It's about choosing every single day, in every single moment, to come home to one another, to build something real and honest and true. He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring set in delicate white gold. I want to marry you, he continued, his voice steady and strong. Not despite everything we've been through, but because of it. Because we know what we're made of. We know that our love can survive honesty, vulnerability, and fear. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. I want to grow old with you, to face every challenge with you by my side. Tears streamed down Maya's face as she pulled him up to standing. Yes, she breathed. Yes, 1,000 times yes. James slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, pouring every emotion, every promise, every commitment into that kiss. Maya kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands in his hair, her heart overflowing. They stayed on that rooftop for hours, talking about their future, about the wedding they would plan, about the children they might have, about all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that stretched ahead of them. They talked about the hard conversation that had nearly broken them, and how it had ultimately made them stronger. I'm grateful for David, Maya said quietly as they sat together beneath the stars, her head on James's shoulder. Not because of what he represented, but because his presence in my life forced us to have conversations we needed to have. He was like a mirror, showing me that I needed to examine what I wanted, what I needed, who I was becoming. I understand, James said, kissing the top of her head. Sometimes we need challenges to understand what truly matters. As midnight approached, James drew Maya to her feet and pulled her close. Dance with me, he asked, even though there was no music but the soft sounds of the city below. Maya smiled and wrapped her arms around his neck. They swayed together beneath the London sky, two people who had nearly lost each other but had chosen, instead, to fight for what they had built. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, James replied. Now and forever. He kissed her softly, and in that moment, suspended between the glittering city and the infinite stars, Maya understood that true love wasn't about never falling or never struggling. It was about choosing each other through every season, every challenge, every moment of doubt. When she pulled back slightly to look at him, she saw her entire future reflected in his eyes. And it was beautiful, not because it was perfect, but because it was real and honest and theirs. They returned to their apartment as the city lights began to fade with the approaching dawn. In their bedroom, with boxes still stacked in the hallway, James made love to Maya with a passion and tenderness that spoke of promises and forever. He kissed every part of her, her lips, her neck, her shoulders, the inside of her wrists, whispering words of devotion with each touch. Maya responded with equal fervor, her hands exploring him, her body responding to his with perfect synchronicity. As they moved together, it felt like coming home. Not to a place, but to a person. To the one she had chosen. To the one who had chosen her back, even when things got complicated. Afterward, lying entwined beneath soft sheets, James held Maya close and whispered into her hair, "I will choose you every single day for the rest of my life." Maya turned to face him, their foreheads touching, their breathing synchronized. "And I will choose you, always," she promised. They sealed the promise with another kiss, this one carrying the weight of their entire journey, the confession, the doubt, the hurt, the healing, and ultimately, the choice. Beneath London's dawn light, they lay tangled together, two hearts beating as one, ready to face whatever the future might hold. Because they had learned the greatest secret of all, love isn't about never falling or never struggling. It's about choosing every single day to stand beside the person you love most. It's about honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to keep trying. And for Maya and James, that was more than enough. That was everything.